Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this two-part webinar series with Humu. I'm Rodney Fong, President and CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. Humu is based on the science of how people work together. Today's recording is by Humu's own CEO and co-founder, Laszlo Bock, and Dr. Molly Sands. They will cover why resilience beats contingency planning every time, why resilience matters, and how to build it. I want to thank Humu, Laszlo, and Dr. Molly Sands, and I'll turn it over to them now.
Hi, folks. This is Laszlo Bock. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Humu and the author of the book Work Rules. I'm seeing some questions about sound. Can folks hear me now? Just throw out a Q&A. Yes, if anybody can hear or wave. Yes, excellent. Nice to see some familiar names in there. Tony, how you doing? Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We wanted to give folks a minute or two to join. Prior to founding Humu, I was the Senior Vice President of People Operations at Google for 10 years. And I'll start with a little context about what we do at Humu and why we're doing these seminars, and then we'll dive in along with my guest, Dr. Molly Sands. So at Humu, we nudge people towards better work habits, unlocking the potential of individuals, teams, and organizations. Our nudges are precise, personalized coaching moments that are delivered to people in the moments that matter the most. We're hosting this webinar because our mission is to make work better for everyone, everywhere. And over the past few weeks, our partners have been asking us how to best support their people and ensure the continued success of their businesses. And we're guessing you've got similar questions. So we've pulled together our top scientifically backed tips to share with you today. Before we dive in, I do want to call attention to our crisis resilience solution. We've built a 3-month package of nudges that make it easy for leaders to help their teams and organizations stay connected, manage stress, and move forward in the face of all the uncertainty that we're confronted with. We developed our crisis resilience solution in direct response to the COVID crisis. Our aim is to give leaders insight into how challenges differ across their organizations, and then to meet each person where they are to offer them the best support possible. If you're interested, you can learn more at humu.com/crisis-resilience. And I think it's the first Google result as well. At Humu, we built a solution that automates investing in resilience on a large scale. But leaders at organizations of every size can take a few actions today that will benefit organizations tomorrow and everyone tomorrow. So today, as I mentioned, Dr. Molly Sands, one of our people scientists at Humu, is joining me. Molly specializes in the design of workplace behavior change solutions at Humu, and she's been leading the development of our crisis resilience solution. Her team implements scientifically validated interventions and analytic approaches to make work better for everyone, everywhere. Before she joined the team at Humu, Molly specialized in consumer behavior as a market research consultant in the advanced analytics division at a firm called Chadwick Martin Bailey. Her PhD is in social psychology, and she earned it at Northeastern University, where her research focused on emotion regulation and well-being, which is why I think today she's going to have such great advice and tips for us. So here's a quick look at what we're going to cover today. I'm going to ask Molly what the academic research tells us about how to successfully navigate a crisis. We'll then talk through a few ways that leaders can balance productivity with empathy and deepen organizational capacity for resilience, before Molly turns the tables on me about what topics I've heard come up over and over again as I've talked to other executives. Feel free to ask questions using the chat feature throughout, and we'll follow up with you after the webinar to answer questions folks have. And then at the end, we'll also share some of the resources we have to help. So with that, let's dive in. Over the past month, organizations have had to make historic shifts. Every leader, every manager, every employee I've spoken with is stressed, is overwhelmed, is uncertain about the future, and asking, what does resilience look like in this context? And why does resilience come before contingency planning? Why is that the most important thing? So my first question, Molly, Dr. Sands, is leaders have a lot on their plates right now. Why should they make it a top priority to help their people build resilience out of all the other things they could be focusing on?
Yeah, so generally speaking, just so we're all on the same page here, resilience is the ability for people to bounce back from adversity or failure and to respond more positively to challenges in their environment. And so at Humu, when we think about resilience and how we can help build those capabilities for our partners, we're really focused on individual resilience, as well as social resilience. And individual resilience is basically what it sounds like. It's how do you help an individual person to have the skills and resources they need to respond more positively to challenges. But we also focus a lot on team dynamics at Humu, and that's where this component of social resilience comes in that's really important. And a lot of this is based on John Cacioppo and colleagues' work from the University of Chicago, where they really think about this as sort of a multi-dimensional thing. So an individual can be socially resilient, and generally those people tend to really focus on understanding different perspectives, value being collaborative, but this is also a quality that can emerge in groups and teams. And when that happens, they're typically groups and teams that are really aligned on shared perspectives, they acknowledge and embrace differences, and they have common goals and sufficient resources. And so at Humu, we really want those two components of resilience to be strong for organizations because we know that that will help carry them forward.
Molly, you mentioned burnout. Can you talk a little bit about that more and maybe expand on why resilience matters so much for business continuity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually I think we might have gotten slightly ahead. So I'm gonna talk a little, oh no, sorry, Diana, can you flip to the next slide? I want to talk just a little bit more about why leaders should really make this a top priority, and then dive a little further into the burnout component of this. But this is really one of the most effective ways that leaders can help their people stay productive, collaborative, and committed in the current circumstances that we're all facing. And resilience is really important for that bounce back quality. This is a long-term challenge that we're facing. And so we want to make sure that we're really investing in giving people skills and resources they need to face this particular crisis. And there's a few reasons that the current situation is really challenging for individuals. And one is the social isolation component. So while of course sheltering in place and all of these efforts we're putting in place to really help people stay healthy and safe are really important, it does leave people psychologically vulnerable because social connections and those strong bonds you have with people in your life, many of whom you interact with at work, are really, really important for being able to rise to the occasion and face challenges and cope with change. So in this current environment, we have to be really, really intentional about how we invest in maintaining social connections. I think the other thing that leaders really should think about in this situation is that we know emotions don't operate in silos. So all of the challenges people are facing in other aspects of their lives, and including in their work life, will sort of bleed into what they're doing, the ways that they interact with people and approach their colleagues. There's some really great work around misattribution of emotion. So if you're feeling really stressed or having a lot of personal difficulties, that's going to change the way that you make decisions, the way that you approach people. And the emotions that come up in the face of a global pandemic are often centered on things like threat and disgust, and people are feeling afraid. Jess Tracy has some really interesting research around those emotions that actually shows that in times when people are feeling that way, they tend to be more judgmental of others' behaviors, and they're a lot less generous in their interpretations of intent. And this is really where resilience comes in, because the most effective organizations are going to be able to align around a cohesive set of goals, and they're going to innovate, and they're going to do more with less, and their teams are going to collaborate in ways that really help them invest in the future. But this isn't necessarily going to be people's natural tendencies right now when they're facing some of these challenges. And so if leaders can help their organizations be in a place where they're really building those capacities for individual and social resilience, they're going to be much more successful in terms of aligning the group behind common goals, avoiding those really high levels of employee burnout, and ultimately ensuring just greater business continuity.
So actually, Molly, if I could dig in a little bit on something you just said before we go to the
Yeah.
next point about burnout. The point about emotions bleeding into things. So I had an interaction with a colleague last night who was stressed about some decisions we made at Humu. Unhappy about this org change or that org change. And later that evening, I was reflecting on a similar theme, which is this person, they have siblings who have lost their jobs. The economy's, doing who knows what. Humu's doing fine, but I have far more information about Humu than this person who's an employee of Humu has. And it made me wonder if the level of stress this person was feeling and their agitation and how upset they were, and really like they were really upset about this organizational change. How much of it was the change and how much of it was everything on the outside world kind of bleeding into it? And your comment made me think it might be more of the latter. And it makes me wonder, and the question is, for all of us in our daily lives, how much of what we're seeing when we bump into other people on Zoom or Hangouts or VC or whatever, and they're acting in like stressed out ways or abrupt ways, how much of that is people just absorbing and bleeding in from what's happening around the world? And how should we respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really great point and a great question, because there's so much research about even the most subtle manipulation. So I used to work in a lab where we did subtle things like showed people pictures outside of their awareness that would cause them to feel some feelings of threat, and that would actually change the way that they judge the people around them. So you can imagine that if
what was an
something,
example of what was a picture like that, like outside awareness? Is that like something behind
so
me?
you do this, it's this technique called binocular rivalry, and you basically show each of your eyes a different picture, and your brain will try to make sense of that information and process one of them more fully. The other, that you still see these biases emerge in the way that people make decisions that are really consistent with what you would expect them to do if they had been exposed to that type of emotional situation. And so I think that speaks to the fact that, I mean, the amount of change, the amount of adversity that people are facing, the amount of stress is really huge right now. And so you should anticipate that is going to come up, and that's going to mean that people have, shorter fuses, and that smaller changes and just things that might in other circumstances really not bother them may at this time. And that's exactly why we think resilience is so important. Resilience is one of those characteristics that can really help people to take a different mindset and, really make decisions that are more positive in these circumstances. But I think overall, we all just want to be really sensitive to the needs of our colleagues and friends right now, and know that they probably don't have as much capacity for coping with challenging emotional situations as they might in other times.
Huh. So kind of back to the question on the slide then, is that the biggest risk, this sort of bleeding over of emotions, or what are the biggest risks to kind of business and how we operate in business as usual today, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest risks is not so much the bleeding over of emotions, but the ability to sort of rise above that and collaborate really effectively. So while crisis can kind of bind people together, and with strong leadership is actually likely to help people align behind really concrete, important goals, you can definitely end up in a situation where individuals are looking out for themselves more so than they would be otherwise, and are less collaborative and cooperative. And so many businesses right now that I talk with every day are really facing a lot of difficulties in terms of having to lay people off, needing to change their strategies, needing individuals to step into slightly different roles and responsibilities for either temporary or longer term periods of time. And so helping people to feel like they're able to cope with those changes with all of the stress and adversity they may be facing in other aspects of their lives, and to going above and beyond that to really collaborate super effectively, I think are the biggest challenges and the reasons why leaders need to invest in resilience for the individuals within their organizations right now.
So if resilience is sort of the secret sauce to keeping teams functioning when we're distributed and everyone's kind of panicking and freaking out, what works and what doesn't? And I see some of the Q&A people are asking for advice on some of these topics, and there's some other questions in there too that we'll try to get to. But what works and what does not work when you're trying to make a resilience program?
Yeah, so I think that Linda Hoops has actually done some really nice research here. She's an IO psychologist that's focused a lot on how organizations can invest in their people in ways that help them build personal resilience, with the end goal of coping more effectively with change. And she's really identified 4 things that make programs really effective. The first one is to make strong connections. So people learn the best. We talk a lot about this at Humu too, but people learn the best when they can actually experience things, they can practice them, they have really concrete, actionable things to take forward. They learn well from stories and specific examples. So this isn't the time for a very abstract resilience training. This is a time to give people very concrete suggestions about what they can do differently. She also believes that keeping it simple is really important. And there's a lot of research that shows that people that cope better with daily hassles, so just the small irritating things that happen to you day to day when you're not in a global pandemic, those same individuals actually cope better with the big stuff too. And so we really want to make sure that we give people opportunities to practice these skills in both small and large impact situations. The third thing she really focuses on is creating mechanisms for follow through. So this isn't something that people will build overnight. I think there's been a lot of nice work that talks about resilience almost as a muscle. You wouldn't expect to go out and run a marathon tomorrow, or at least I certainly wouldn't. But you also shouldn't expect to become an expert emotion regulator overnight either. So it's really important that interventions and programs are not just one-time trainings or one-time interventions, but it's something you continuously build on and turn into habits over time. And then the final thing that she thinks, and of course I agree, makes programs really, really effective is a focus on learning. So when you're thinking about resilience, personal resilience is going to differ drastically across your company, and you really need to meet people where they are. I think Carol Dweck's research around growth mindset is really relevant here. So for resilience programs, you want to focus on rewards, progress, like how you reward progress, effort, growth, improvements. And one really concrete way for leaders to do that is to focus on learning goals rather than performance goals. So rather than saying you need to be this resilient at this time, you really want to focus on trying new things, to engaging in new behaviors, taking on a new mindset, and that kind of needs to be what's rewarded in terms of those programs.
Okay, so to recap, the 4 things that help teams build resilience are making training and ideas tangible, making them real and concrete. Number 2, keeping it super simple. Number 3, have a mechanism for following through and checking in. And then 4th, focusing on learning goals rather than performance goals. I think that's probably particularly apropos. I know one of the questions people asking about, it's a time of crisis, people are struggling with layoffs, making tough decisions. How do you make time for this? And I think the idea of, be very simple, very straightforward, and focusing on learning just as much as you do performance is a pretty powerful idea. I know you've been working closely on our Humu crisis resilience solution. You're one of the people who led the development of it. One quick question before we dive into that. And the question is, setting Humu aside for a second, what is the one thing you would suggest people do to build resilience on their teams, given that we're distributed, given that people are stressed out, given this emotional bleeding? If there's one piece of advice you could give the folks who are on this webinar, do this starting tomorrow, what would that advice be?
Yeah, I'm going to fold 2 things into that one piece of advice because I think they're more powerful in tandem. But I would tell leaders that you want to really create a strong shared social identity at your organization right now. The message that we are all in this together is really, really important for keeping people collaborative, emphasizing that they need to care for their colleagues and that those are the types of behaviors that are going to be rewarded right now will be really important. But in tandem with that, reinforcing the importance of your work is really important too. So emphasizing the positive impact of your work is a really powerful way to combat burnout and help people cope with work-related stress and change. So leaders should definitely lean into that shared social identity and talk about the vision and purpose of the organization and how every single person at your company is so essential to bringing that forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and then turning to just for a moment to the Humu side. So crisis resilience solution, not so much about how it works in general, but as you've been seeing all the nudges going out, what crisis resilience nudges seem to be having the biggest impact on people we support?
Yeah. Um, so a couple examples come to mind for me, and one that is particularly powerful is really about preventing silos from forming. So with the shift to remote work, it's really easy for people to end up just engaging with their closest colleagues or friends, and for silos to form within and across teams. But one of our nudges encourages people to intentionally bring a skeptic into their next conversation or in to review their work. So really thinking about someone that doesn't always agree with you and inviting them to a meeting or to review something that you've done, so you still have those mechanisms for constructive feedback. And I think that one is so interesting and popular because it's a bit counterintuitive, but it's really, really important for growing during this time. And then the other area that I think has been really positively received and is sort of unique is really thinking about how we can nudge caregivers during this time. So there's so many people that are balancing work and family responsibilities in a very unprecedented way. It's never been asked of them before. And at first glance, I think it seems like, well, of course, there's not research on like what to do when your 3 elementary school children are home and you're also supposed to be working a full-time job from your laptop. But there's actually a lot we can draw on from behavioral science that's really helpful for supporting parents in some creative ways. Um, and so, for instance, there's some research about happiness and how happiness really has less to do with how well and smoothly everything in our lives is going, and more about how it compares to what we've expected. So we can do some subtle interventions with people where we help them to adjust those expectations to bring them in line with the reality of their current situation. And so one of those ideas is to just find one lofty goal that you had for this time of social isolation and let it go. And that's a really, really strong way to actually help yourself be happier and more content, which will unlock more productivity and positive outcomes for you. Um, so those are a couple that have sort of stood out. Obviously, these subtle mindset shifts are powerful, but not going to solve every challenge every caregiver is facing. But at Humu, most of our work really focuses on understanding how small modifications to behavior and subtle shifts like this can actually have a massive impact on happiness and productivity at scale.
Well, what I love about those points you're making is, resilience is kind of something that we normally think of as this is how we react to the world. This is how we are resilient against all the forces against us. But both this idea of, and this nudge of, come into something and play the role of the skeptic, and the kind of expect different things, gets to the other side of it. It's not I'm reacting to the world, I'm actually changing what I anticipate will happen. If I anticipate somebody's going to come in and be the negative person because that's the assigned role, suddenly it's okay for them to do that. It's not so threatening, and we can actually have a productive conversation, and same on the home caregiving side. Well, I promised we'd save a few minutes to talk about kind of what I'm hearing and seeing from all the folks. Molly, anything you want to throw back at me?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's turn it over to you. You mentioned earlier that leaders have a lot on their plates right now. How can they stay resilient themselves in the face of so much change and uncertainty?
So the trick with being a leader, whether it's managing 2 people or managing 20,000 people, is everyone's going to be looking to you for reassurance. And there's 2 things related to that that are really, really important. One is that you don't have to have all the answers. You do need to be confident and consistent. If you're visibly anxious, if you're visibly disorganized, people will pick up on that and they will freak out. So you need to project confidence. And it's okay to say, I don't know the answers. I will update you as soon as I have them. And even better, say, I will update you each day until I have them. But giving people that clarity and structure and confidence will go a long way. At the same time, you need a personal outlet so that you're not absorbing all this stuff just on your shoulders. So what that means is, and it's probably, by the way, not your boss, but what it means is finding somebody, a peer, a friend, a spouse, somebody, someplace where you can get this off your chest and where you can have a release. Because as a leader, your job is to show up and be what your people need. And they need you there right now more than ever. And that consistency, that calm is going to be everything. I'll give you a quick example. One of the nudges we sent that surprisingly resonated the most with very senior executives is take a deep breath and pause for 30 seconds. And it doesn't sound like rocket science, but it turns out what CEOs, CHROs, CFOs are telling us is getting that reminder in the middle of the day to just take a breath actually has completely changed the way their days are unfolding, because it reminds them to kind of get centered and then be their best person, their best leader for their teams. So that's the single biggest thing that we've seen folks focusing on and grappling with it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. In your conversations with other executives, what people-related challenges are they struggling with most right now?
Well, I think the biggest is kind of building their own resilience and figuring out how to navigate this. And I alluded to that a little bit. You know, executives are people too. And, you know, I'm not saying they deserve a ton of sympathy. They get paid the big bucks in order to, you know, have the big shoulders. But what's been interesting is the conversation has been shifting with executives over the last few weeks from talking about technical infrastructure and kind of business operations needed to support remote work, and more to the social and emotional infrastructure needed to kind of care for the people and keep them focused and productive. I've also heard a lot of leaders say that the switch to distributed collaboration has left them feeling almost like they've lost some of their senses. They sort of don't have their finger on the pulse of the organization anymore. So they're actually more confused and they don't know what to do. And that's why some of the steps that Molly, I think you talked about building resilience, you know, making things very tangible, checking in with people, simplifying and clarifying processes, giving flexibility here and there. Those matter more than ever, because our impulse when we panic, when we feel stressed, whether you're a leader or an individual, is to lock down, to control more. And it's exactly today's environment where you need to give people a little more freedom and trust and have simpler ways of checking in and following up that will actually cause them to be more effective and more capable. Because you're going to be building that social and emotional infrastructure, which today is actually more important than, you know, do you have a perfect visibility through your VC at somebody's image.
Great advice. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us in our last couple of minutes today?
Yeah, I think if I step back, the way to think about where we are today is, you know, every large business. I was on the phone with the chief operating officer of one of the big three consulting firms recently, and this person was telling me how, because they're a consulting firm, they of course have a contingency plan for everything. So they've got, you know, binders for earthquakes, binders for fires, binders for every possible thing, binders for pandemics. So the team is executing. And because they're all type A, you know, mission-oriented people, everybody appears to be working really well. But underneath it, people are stressed and people are freaking out. And in areas where you're seeing high performance in organizations right now, my belief and what I've seen in the market is it's a short-term boost. People are kind of working off adrenaline. And as people adjust to the new normal of we're distributed, we've got this pandemic in the background, we've got family stuff going on, there's two big risks. One is that we have another shock to the system. It goes on longer than we thought. Things get worse before they get better. Unemployment keeps climbing. There's all kinds of things that could happen. The second big risk is people just get exhausted. It's really hard to interact by Zoom. It's really hard to have these conversations remotely. It's hard to feel like you're blind, like these executives say they are, like they've lost a sense in trying to navigate and deal with their organizations. So the biggest thing I've observed is that just like we've learned on the health side that small individual actions like washing your hands makes a difference, staying at home makes a difference. That's why mortality rates are flattening. That's why, you know, infection rates seem to be slowing down, and God willing that continues. Those tiny, small little actions make a tremendous difference when everybody takes those actions. And as we think about our jobs, and we all want to have our jobs and keep them and have them continue, it's our belief, and what we've seen is that these small actions also have a huge compounding cumulative action effect. It's things like checking in. It's things like over communicating. It's things like projecting calm. It's more than anything, things like being empathetic and starting by asking people, what do you think? How are you feeling? And really caring for the human being. Because people who are panicked and feeling stressed like many are today, they're not going to be productive. They're not going to be effective, not when they're freaking out. So you need to show up for the human beings through these small little steps that are all the things that we ought to be doing anyway. They're just much more important now. So in closing, I kind of want to share just a few things. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a new crisis resilience solution to help companies build capacity through nudges. Feel free to check that out. We also have an offering for individuals that anyone can sign up for by, again, going to our website at humu.com/remote nudges, and that's free to anybody in the world. And we've seen a tremendous response, and in fact, it's what inspired us to build something a little more structured to help organizations in this area. But we really just want to help folks. We've been posting tactical tips on how to navigate this crisis on our blog each week. So we'll send you a follow-up email with a link to that. And if you want to learn more about any of the topics we covered, feel free to send an email to the address you see there, resilience.webinar@humu.com. With that, we're a couple minutes over, so I want to thank everyone for participating and just ask and remind everyone, take care of one another and care for one another. It's the most important thing we can be doing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Laszlo and Dr. Sands. San Francisco is certainly resilient, and we know how to come out of the crisis, hopefully all together, stronger and even better. The Chamber of Commerce is celebrating 170 years this year. It's been through earthquakes, recessions, and had to redefine itself in so many different ways. The Chamber now is going to fight for all businesses of all sizes, and through public policy, advocacy, and economic development. If you're not already, please consider joining the Chamber of Commerce. You can go to our website, sfchamber.com. And for those entrepreneurs, small business leaders, we're going to advocate for you. So hopefully you'll join, follow us on social media, and we'll see you at our next event.